Hey 8th graders, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're going on a bit of a journey to uncover the hidden and honestly sometimes pretty harsh realities behind a totally critical period in American history, Reconstruction. We're zeroing in on these social tensions and racial violence that happened right after the Civil War ended. We really want to look beyond just the dates and the major battles and focus in on the actual human experience. We're going to explore what happens when the rules of a nation literally change overnight, but the attitudes of the people living in it don't. So grab your notebooks, get focused, and let's unravel this historical mystery together.
Okay, let's dive right into this massive paradox. On paper, right, the end of the Civil War was a monumental victory for human rights. Slavery was abolished. Done. But does changing the law automatically change society? Well, the hard truth we're going to learn today is that it doesn't. Ending slavery legally was absolutely crucial, a massive step, but it didn't instantly fix everything in reality. In fact, for many African Americans, claiming their newfound freedom sparked this entirely new wave of intense resistance and fear from folks who wanted things to stay exactly the way they were.
So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be covering 1. Laws versus social acceptance. 2. The rise of intimidation. 3. Targeting education and progress. 4. The federal response. And 5. Education requires biblical morality.
Let's start with Section 1. Laws versus social acceptance, the illusion versus the reality.
African Americans were officially citizens now, but what did that actually mean when they walked out their front doors every day? And this brilliantly illustrates that exact gap. On one hand, we see the illusion of legal freedom, citizenship, voting rights, and for the first time, real political power. Many even held office. But we really have to contrast that with the ground-level reality. Because the end of slavery severely threatened the old social order that many white Southerners were used to, the response wasn't acceptance, it was fear, it was deep resistance, and it was the creation of organized violence. Freedmen who were simply trying to exercise their basic rights to vote, hold office, or own land were suddenly facing extreme danger.
The big takeaway here is that you can rewrite the rulebook for sure, but changing hearts and minds, that takes a much longer struggle. The Reconstruction era is vital for us to understand because it reveals exactly why the struggle for civil rights didn't just wrap up in the 1860s. It continued for a century and beyond. Legal freedom did not mean social acceptance, and that deep tension set the stage for decades of future conflict.
Moving on to Section 2, the rise of intimidation, maintaining the old order. Because their old order was shattered, some white Southerners decided to push back. And they didn't do it through the courts. They did it through terror. To maintain white dominance and disrupt the flourishing community life of freedmen, secret societies like the Ku Klux Klan formed. And their primary tool was fear. They burned homes and property to destroy economic independence. They attacked black churches, which were the very centers of community and faith. They physically targeted African American voters on their way to the polls to strip them of their political voice. And they specifically threatened any freedman holding office or owning land. This was, quite literally, a systematic attempt to violently force a newly free people right back into a state of submission.
That brings us to Section 3, targeting education and progress, attacking the future.
Now, I want you to really think critically about this for a second. Out of all the things out there to attack, why target African American schools specifically? Like, why burn down a simple wooden building filled with desks and books? What is so threatening about a school?
So, the crucial point comes down to this. Education empowered freedmen, so attacking schools was a way to limit progress. An educated person knows their rights. An educated person can read a contract, run a business, and lead a community. Education is pure empowerment. The groups carrying out this violence knew. They knew for a fact that if they could stop African Americans from learning, they could put a ceiling on their progress. Destroying schools was a highly calculated tactic to keep people oppressed.
Section 4, the federal response, pushback from Washington. Naturally, you might be wondering where on earth was the federal government while all this was happening? Well, the primary tool Washington used to step in was a series of laws known as the Enforcement Acts. By definition, these were federal laws designed specifically to punish intimidation, stop interference, and aggressively protect African American voting rights. The federal government was essentially stepping up and saying, hey, if the local authorities won't protect these citizens from secret societies, we absolutely will.
But here's the tragic irony of the Enforcement Acts. The federal intent was noble and totally necessary, punish violence, and protect voters. But the actual result? Deeply flawed. The enforcement of these acts was terribly inconsistent. Why? Well, because over time, the political will in the North just began to fade. The leaders up in Washington simply lost the energy and the focus required to continually police the South. The laws on the books were good, but without the persistent willpower to actually enforce them, the intimidation was allowed to continue.
All right, 8th graders, let's pause for a quick knowledge check. You have these 5 homework questions, and based on what we've covered today, you are now perfectly equipped to answer every single one of them. You know that violence limited freedoms through property destruction and voter intimidation. You know the enforcement acts were meant to protect those voters. You know the KKK affected politics through fear. You know exactly why schools were targeted to halt progress, and you know community life was deeply disrupted by attacks on churches and leaders. You've totally got this.
Section 5. Education requires biblical morality. The godly learner philosophy.
We've just studied how supposedly advanced, educated people in history use their intelligence to organize secret societies and invent entirely new ways to oppress others. And this brings us to a foundational philosophy from your source text at HeroesMart Academy. Romans 12:17-18 states, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." I really want you to contrast this beautiful, peaceful principle with the fear and the violence of the post-Civil War era we just studied. I mean, it is a night and day difference.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it frames the entire point of learning. Without morality, education just leads to bad choices that end up hurting others. What is the point of being smart, of being supposedly highly educated, if you lack a moral compass? Intelligence without that compass is exactly what fueled the historical tragedies we literally just explored. The alternative presented here is a spiritual mind. As Romans 8 promises, keeping your mind spiritual brings peace. When education is intertwined with biblical morality, you don't just get smart, you get wise. You become someone who builds communities up rather than tearing them down.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply personal question for you to ponder today. You are getting the education, you're sharpening your mind every single day. Now, what will you let guide your choices? Will you just be smart, or will you pair that incredibly sharp mind with a strong moral heart to truly bring peace to the world around you? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today, and I'll see you next time.